All right, welcome back to the Wide Right podcast, although we should probably rename it Atlantic and Coastal, which is what Andy Bitter called his podcast for The Athletic. We had talked about doing this, Andy, before the season got started, having sort of a weekly conversation on the ACC. I think we delayed it a few weeks because we wanted to actually see some action, see what these teams were made of. You just finished watching North Carolina take it to Virginia Tech 41-10. I just watched Wake Forest put an end to FSU's 4-0 start, drove up to Tallahassee to watch that game. And the week before that, I mean, Miami was just a mess against Middle Tennessee State. Meanwhile, Clemson's, cleaning the clock of NC State and Wake Forest. They've kind of established themselves again as the number one team. So we got a lot to talk about. Got some mailbag questions that we get every single week at the Athletic that we can dive into. We have our power rankings we put together. So I want to sort of just lay the table of all the topics we're going to cover here. But first of all, how are you doing after 5 weeks of this season?
I'm doing fine. The Hokies aren't doing so well, but I'm trudging along, trying to figure out ways to write interesting stuff about a team that might be staring at a 2-6 record here coming up. I mean, it's the next couple games here. They play Pitt, NC State, or in between there, Miami as well. 2-6 is a very real possibility and not a record you see in Blacksburg a lot of the time. So it's interesting time because the fans here are like still supporting Brent Pry, new coach. They're still support the team and very exciting, but at the same time, like, what's going on here? This is not what we signed up for. We're probably hoping to see a little bit more progress than what they've had.
Yeah, I think it's been the same story at Miami, to be honest with you. They get off to that 2-0 start, then they go to Texas A&M, lose a game that I think most people thought they would lose right at the start of the season, but we're in it in the fourth quarter, just couldn't punch it in the red zone. And they come home and they lay an absolute egg against Middle Tennessee State and just give up big play after big play. Tyler Van Dyke gets benched. And Miami, basically Miami's, right? This is what they've been known for now since joining the ACC. You've never been a Miami believer, and you've been right all along.
Well, it's somewhat telling that we got the game time for Virginia Tech Miami next week, and it's 12:30 on regional sports networks. It's like this is why the ACC. This is why the ACC can't have nice things. It's because these two programs are supposed to be sort of these staples of the league and were brought in to enhance the football product. And yeah, I mean, Virginia Tech had its run for a while. Miami hasn't been, this bad the entire time, but both these programs are in rough spots. And you go, why can't the ACC get more respect nationally? It's like, well, because your brand programs are just not there. And, Florida State turning a little bit of a corner maybe this year, but Virginia Tech and Miami have sort of been in the wilderness here lately. And, this league needs those programs to be a lot better than they have been. So I thought it was funny when I saw that game time and everybody's like, man, they should, I think one person tweeted at me, they should actually broadcast that on the History Channel because it's been a while since those programs have been that good. I forget who tweeted that. I'm sorry to not give you credit on that, but I thought that was a funny line.
Yeah. Mario Cristobal, huge week for him and this program because Tyler Van Dyke was what everybody was banking on going into this year. And Miami fans know that it's been a struggle for him. He's not looked like the same quarterback over the last 6 games. People pointing the finger at Josh Gaddis, the offensive coordinator, saying he's not tailoring the offense to TVD. Some people have jumped off the TVD bandwagon altogether. They're saying, let's see more of Jake Garcia. So, and North Carolina's good, man. They've got, one of the best offenses in the country. And this Drake May kid has come out 19 touchdowns, 1 interception. I know their defense hasn't been great until they played Virginia Tech last week, but to me, right now you'd have to say they have to be the favorite, right, to win the division at this point.
I'm not sure if there's a favorite. I think everybody is equally an unfavorite in the league. Let's start with the defense there with UNC. Don't go writing that they've turned a corner on defense based on playing Virginia Tech because West Virginia did the same thing to them the previous week. And ODU kind of did the same thing to them in the opener, and they didn't look that great against Wofford and Boston College. So I think it's just a bad offense that the Hokies have. So I'm not going to go, Gene Chizik has turned a corner when they're giving up, 500 yards to everybody else and a load of points. I will say Drake May is fantastic. We do that little Heisman thing each week here where we turn in a ballot to Matt Fortuna. I voted him number 1 on my ballot, and it's early in the year and things are going to change, but I just saw him up close in person He counted for 400 some yards, 5 touchdowns, 3 of them passing, 2 of them rushing. I mean, he looks like the total package on that team. And again, Virginia Tech didn't play good defense on that, so they certainly contributed to it. But I watched that offense. I go, man, that's a tough group to stop. And Drake May is a big reason for that. So, I saw Sam Howell play a couple years against Virginia Tech and maybe just didn't have strong showings all the time against the Hokies. I thought May was more effective in that game than what I saw Howell a couple times. The 2020 game, Howell was amazing because everybody was amazing in that COVID year against the defense the Hokies trotted out in that game. But I was just very impressed by him. And I'd like to see him against some other teams and some other games where, the opposing offense is going to be able to put up some points and match them a little bit. But, I like what UNC has on the offensive side of the ball. And if you're that good on one side of the ball, that might be enough in the Coastal this year because, I thought the Coastal Chaos was going to die a slow death here and it'd go out with a whimper. Then all of a sudden Georgia Tech beats Pitt. And you go, what? Anybody can win this division at this point. Like I wouldn't expect Georgia Tech or Virginia Tech or honestly Virginia to be up there just based on the roster, but I wouldn't rule out Duke. Pitt obviously is still in the mix. I wouldn't rule out Miami, North Carolina, maybe the favorite. I don't know. It's a really bad division. But to get back to the original point, I do like Drake May quite a bit. I think he's an incredible player.
Yeah, and I would venture to say, I mean, this week Kevin Steele actually compared him to Bills quarterback Josh Allen because you mentioned the 2 rushing touchdowns. And yes, he's not going to run for 100 yards and be Lamar Jackson, but his running game is just as effective in terms of being able to move the chains and hurt defenses. And so for Miami, this is a huge week. Can they rebound from that loss? Can they maintain themselves? Or are we going to have, 2-3 versus 2-4? In Blacksburg, 12:30 a week from now?
That would not surprise me. I think both programs are sort of in that situation where everybody got all excited in the offseason where it's new coach. All right, clean slate, everything starts over. In Miami, a little bit higher expectations just based on the talent level I think they had there. And, I don't think Manny Diaz was an abject failure there. I think, Justin Fuente, after 6 years, it was trending in the direction of not great with how things were going. I think they pulled the plug on Manny pretty early in his run there. So I don't want to judge him too unfairly in that whole thing, but it's Miami. So they always have a talented roster. Virginia Tech didn't really have that. People were very excited about the change that they had there, but I think you get to the reality of the season and the reality of just the transition that you have on those staffs. And it's tough. It's tough to bring in a new coach and just automatically be that much better. Maybe it's not that tough. Mike Elko seems to be doing a good job of turning things around at Duke, but it's not just press a button and all of a sudden these teams are great typically. So I think you always get through the off season. It's a time of optimism. And then you get to the season, you lose a game or two and you go, oh man, there's some issues here that we overlooked in our excitement in the off season. Those are popping up for both those programs right now.
All right. I want to dive into our power rankings. I put my list together. I know you still haven't, and we do this usually on Thursday anyway. So I'm getting ahead of us, our usual pace. But this is what I came up with. This is my 1 through 14, and you stop me whenever you want to stop me and give me your thoughts. Clemson, obviously the clear number 1.
Stop. Okay. I agree with you. Clemson, yes. Clear it away, number 1.
I put Wake Forest number 2. And,
I agree. I agree with that.
Here's why. I'll give a quick take. I watched them against Florida State in Tallahassee, 28-7 in the third quarter. I didn't really appreciate the slow mesh for what it is. I thought, well, it's a little gimmicky. It's unbelievable how good Sam Hartman is at running that thing and how tough it is to defend. And Florida State, look, they're in Mike Norvell's 3rd season. They got off to a good start. They beat LSU. I get it. But I mean, they just looked overmatched trying to stop this offense. And it was that way a year ago as well. And so, Norvell's had a few cracks at stopping it, hasn't had any success really. And I think to me, the fact they played Clemson double overtime, went on the road and won a tough game at Florida State, that makes them number 2. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, I agree with that. I was kind of waiting for Wake Forest to win a game that was notable. They played three pretty easy games to start, almost blew it against Liberty. And you go, okay, this team has a 1-point win against Liberty, whatever the margin was. But then they played Clemson toe to toe all the way at that, probably kicking themselves for not winning that game. And then to win at Florida State, like, Florida State has been pretty good this year. And to go on the road to win that still, I like that. That's a better resume, I think, than a lot of teams in the ACC have.
All right. I put NC State at number 3. I know they just lost to Clemson. I know Syracuse is still undefeated, but I think NC State, considering the fact that they weren't completely embarrassed by Clemson. I know they were on their home field, but it was relatively a close game right up until the third quarter, when Clemson started to pull away a little bit from them. It wasn't until a fourth quarter touchdown, I think, made it more than a 2-score game. To me, the Wolfpack right now, I'd still consider them a top 3 team in the ACC.
I might have Syracuse ahead of them just in power rankings right now, just as a nod to an undefeated team right now. And I know the Orange have been playing with fire lately. That Purdue game, very fortunate to win that one. Purdue kind of melted down at the end there. Then UVA, they were crushing them at halftime, then just sort of took their foot off the gas. UVA gets back into it. Syracuse almost loses that one at the end, but they pulled both those out. They're still 5-0. I think I would give the nod to the undefeated team over an NC State team that hasn't looked great all season. I mean, Texas Tech was probably the best win, just off the top of my head in terms of the schedule, and probably fortunate to get out of East Carolina with a win in that game, and then 10-point loss to Clemson like that. So, it's a toss up between those two. I think right now, with the limited sample size that we'd have, I'd give the edge to the undefeated team here.
All right. Well, Syracuse fans are going to be mad at me, but what else is new? I have them 5th behind Florida State, who I still think
face.
I still think they have a more impressive win, beating a 4-1 LSU team in Louisiana. I also think, for the most part, I mean, they handled Boston College easily at home. Yes, they lost to Wake Forest, but that's how much respect I have for Wake Forest. I think none of Syracuse's wins match up to Florida State's best win.
Virginia Tech handled Boston College handily at home. That kind of tells you where Boston College, and by extension, where Louisville is in this whole process. So, coming off the loss last week, I'd maybe drop Florida State a little bit, but I agree with you that their overall resume is still pretty good. And amazing, we haven't hit a Coastal Division team yet. We're 4 or 5 teams in, and we're still in the Atlantic.
Yeah, our readers weren't too happy with that, especially the Pitt readers, up until they lost to Georgia Tech this week. They were saying they got no respect, and now I sort of feel vindicated a little bit. Like, hey, guess what? This is why we had 5 Atlantic Division teams ranked ahead of you.
Yeah, I don't hear so much from the Pitt fans this week. And I wrote the little blurb last week, and I'm like, I think we might be underrating Pitt here. This seems like the Coastal favorite. And what do? They pull the ultimate Pitt. They go and lose to a team that just fired its coach. Sort of the consensus last place team, picked team in the Coastal. Now that Duke has been a little bit better than expected. First of all, I think Pitt will get right this week with Virginia Tech going up there, because the Hokies never play well in whatever they're calling Heinz Field these days. But that's just been a house of horrors for them. But man, that was sort of poetic justice for the many Pitt fans in our comments section that were complaining about how we're overlooking Pitt and this is the best team in the ACC. It's like, well, maybe not. Maybe put them a little bit lower.
Well, the highest ranked team for me out of the Coastal is North Carolina. I think 31 points over Virginia Tech. To me, yes, I know they lost at home to Notre Dame, and they gave up they've given up a bunch load of points and yards and yada yada yada. It's the best offense, I could say, in my opinion, in the conference, and that's even with Clemson. I think they're more powerful, more explosive than Clemson's offense is. So I give North Carolina the nod at 6. I put Duke 7th, Pitt 8, Miami 9th, and then Georgia Tech. Would you change that 6 through 10 order in any way, shape, or form?
I don't think I would. I like that order. I agree with you on North Carolina, just because I think they have the one side of the ball that's better than anybody else's on particular unit in the Coastal Division, offense or defense. I like what Duke keeps doing. I mean, they whooped up on Virginia, and that historically has been a game that Virginia has handled Duke pretty easily over the years. So perhaps that's a bit turning of the tide. I still don't think they've played a schedule yet where they've truly been challenged in some of the stuff, but a nod to the fact that they're 4-1. I mean, Duke was awful last year. That defense was a sieve, and it's not like that this year. That's truly a credit to what Elko's doing in that first year. Then you went Miami and then Georgia Tech.
I went Pitt, Miami, Georgia Tech. And I know that's
Okay.
almost sinful considering Georgia Tech just won on the road at Pitt, but Pitt's 3-2. I still think if they were to play Georgia Tech 10 times, they'd probably win 8 out of 10. I think Georgia Tech's offense is still having some serious issues. And somehow, some way, I put Miami in the middle there. Maybe it's just foolish on my part. Maybe they get embarrassed this week and fall much deeper in the polls. But I'm giving Miami the benefit of the doubt that they're better than Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, Boston College, Louisville, and Virginia.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. And that's always, you get into a tough thing. It's like, well, this team just beat this team. How could you rank them lower? It's like, well, they played other games, and Georgia Tech just got embarrassed by Ole Miss. Was it like 45-0 or something like that? Clemson beat them pretty handily. Lose at UCF. I don't think that game was really close, even though the score was maybe closer than what people thought it would be. So I'd agree with those. I wouldn't have any big qualms with them.
All right, the bottom four, and this is my order. I'm sure you might disagree. I've got Virginia Tech, Boston College, Louisville, and Virginia in that order.
That is a tough quartet to rank there. Virginia Tech has beaten Boston College, but man, that feels like it was a long time ago, even though it was just a couple of weeks. Boston College just beat Louisville, so you have to put them ahead of Louisville.
Correct.
I mean, Virginia and Louisville play this week, so maybe we'll have some clarity between those two. Maybe I would put Virginia Tech just looks awful to me right now. And like they have that Boston College win, but I mean, the last two games, they've just been blown out. I mean, they've scored 10 points in both those. Haven't scored 10 points in back-to-back games, 10 points or less in back-to-back games since 1989. Wow. So we're going back a ways. This is not a program that has this storied offense that like, oh, of course it's been that long. It's like there have been some pretty lean years offensively, and they haven't done that before. So yeah, maybe I would go, Virginia showed some fight in that Syracuse game. I'll go Virginia, Virginia Tech, Boston College, Louisville.
Okay.
And that way I've preserved some head-to-heads, but I think Louisville could very easily beat Virginia this week. And I think Virginia Tech could very easily be the worst of those teams, but at the same time, Boston College is pretty bad too. I mean, it's a mess at the bottom. I think when your coach is so severely on the hot seat like Louisville is right now with Scott Satterfield, I think you have to put them last. And until they can win and get off of that, Georgia Tech, congratulations. You fired your coach. They were way down there. I didn't have them completely last week. I had Boston College behind them, which probably kind of tells you where the Eagles were. But now the Eagles going to win. Georgia Tech gets a big win to get out of the basement. We'll reward merit here on our very unofficial power rankings that we do. So I'll put Louisville last, but prove me wrong, Cardinals. Beat UVA this week, and you can get out of the cellar.
All right, we'll do the math between your rankings and my rankings and come up with a final list like we do every single week. The week 6 action, we've talked about some of these games already, but just to quickly recap: Louisville at Virginia, Virginia Tech at Pitt, Duke at Georgia Tech, North Carolina at Miami, Clemson at BC, Army at Wake Forest, and then Florida State at NC State. We got mailbag questions. We obviously I want to make sure our listeners remember that we do an ACC mailbag every single week now at The Athletic. I've enjoyed doing them. I've enjoyed the power rankings, Andy. I think it's helped our coverage out a little bit, makes everybody feel like there's an ACC community, right? Where you can go on there and demand Pittsburgh be ranked higher than 6th in the power rankings.
An ACC community where we can still exclude Wake Forest and Pitt, because that's what we try to do. That seems to be the accusations on every single one. We never get any respect. You never answer any questions. Keep asking them. We will answer questions. We'll try to hit all the teams over time here. Maybe not every week.
Right.
And, I do a Virginia Tech mailbag every other week. So maybe a little bit lighter on Hokies questions and lighter on Miami since you do so much coverage on them. But send us questions about everybody. We'll try to hit everybody in the league.
Absolutely. And it's still pretty cheap to sign up for The Athletic. And even if you don't want to read about Miami and Virginia Tech, there's a ton of good coverage and features and all kinds of stuff from our national writers, and Grace Rayner, who did a phenomenal job covering Clemson. I love her recruiting stuff. If you want to keep up with the high school quarterbacks, the best high school quarterbacks in the country and how they're doing, Grace does a great column every single week featuring them. So a lot to read at The Athletic. Anyway, enough selling our product. Mailbag questions. I got about 7 here, and we'll run through them as fast as we can because I know we both got things to do. This is an interesting one. You're Jim Phillips. You got half the 80s urging you Monday morning to do what's right for the conference and get rid of divisions for the ACC championship game this year. What do you do? This is from Jonathan A.
I mean, I've been the champion of getting rid of divisions for a decade. Yeah, I would drop them tomorrow. I think that's probably not something you can do, mid-race. It's not like you can just change up the rules halfway through and do that. But I'd say relax. Let Coastal Chaos play out as only Coastal Chaos can for one last time. And next year you'll have your single division top 2 teams play in the championship game, and maybe that means a top 5 Clemson against a top 15 somebody else. We're probably not getting 2 top 5 teams in this whole thing. So let the Coastal Chaos play out. Let Duke win the division or whatever it is this year. Surprise everybody. Go to the ACC title game. It's just like one sort of fitting finale to this ridiculous division that they've had for such a long time that everybody seems to win every now and then they fall off the face of the earth and somebody else rises up to take it. Yeah, I haven't looked at the standings necessarily to see like what we need to get everybody at 4-4, but Georgia Tech just beat Pitt, so it feels like anything's possible with this thing. Just sit back and enjoy the Coastal ride.
Yeah, the nostalgia in me wants to see the Coastal, division just go at it one last time. So I wouldn't necessarily go beating down the door, but I will say the bigger issue here is, could this potentially cost the ACC a playoff spot, right? I think if Clemson goes undefeated, runs the table, which they very much could do because DJ Uiagalelei is playing phenomenally now. The offense is starting to hum. I think if they run the table, they'll get in. They'll be one of the top 4 teams winning the ACC title and being an undefeated team. But a 1-loss Clemson team or a 1-loss Wake Forest team, let's say somehow Wake Forest ends up running the table, right? And they've got to go and beat an 8-4 North Carolina or a 8-4 Duke or 7-5, whatever way this thing shakes out. I don't think they're getting in the college football playoff with a loss, right? I mean, I think that's really the thing here. Whereas if this were to happen next year, when you go divisionless, Clemson goes 11-1 and they play 11-1 Wake Forest, beat them head to head. I'm guessing in that scenario, the ACC still could have a team get into the playoff. Correct or incorrect?
Well, possibly. I think it depends on who you're comparing them against. Mm-hmm. And how the other leagues play out. It's like, yeah, if you're going to a 1-loss Clemson against a 1-loss SEC team that didn't win its championship down there, yeah, I don't like the Tigers' chances. But we're 7-8 years into the playoff, and they still haven't had a 2-loss team at this point. Is that right?
Can't remember off the top of my head. Yeah.
I think that's true. It seems like as much as they want us to talk about quality of schedule and quality of wins and emphasizing winning your league, they still kind of go by who hasn't lost the most. Right. And if you only have 1 loss, that puts you in pretty elite company, especially if is anybody getting through the Big 12 with less than 2 losses? Is anybody from the Pac-12? I know USC is sort of a reborn team there, but are they going to get through with less than 2 losses? Right. Oregon's already lost big time to Georgia. Big Ten might beat up on each other a little bit along the way. I think it's certainly possible, especially with Notre Dame not in the mix. I mean, that's an independent that is typically discussed up there. I think Clemson could do it with 1 loss.
All right. Maybe this year they could. I don't know. I just think obviously the whole point of getting rid of the ACC divisions and making it the 2 best teams was to sort of avoid those scenarios, I think, in the long run. And I think this year, unfortunately, because the way it looks like the Coastal shaping up, it's not going to be a great matchup for whoever Clemson probably ends up getting in the championship game. But we'll see. Maybe North Carolina surprises us and runs the table themselves the rest of the way here and kind of cruises to the Coastal Division title. All right, this is another question from Michael F. Given that Georgia Tech is ranked 30th in total talent composite, is it possible they are potentially much better than their 107th ranking and were really coached down by Jeff Collins? The change in their play and demeanor against Pitt was startling.
Yeah, that's the ultimate question whenever you fire a coach and the team comes out, plays really well. It's like, is this actually something, or is this a dead cat bounce that you get after you remove somebody? I mean, I think Collins was a terrible coach like in-game coaching, on the field coaching. It's like his whole thing was just like, I'm creating a brand and we're going to recruit better here. It's like, okay, well, what are you actually going to do with the football? Like they're lifting weights on the sideline and doing all this ridiculous stuff. It's like, okay, but what are you doing schematically and how are you making these guys better? That never seemed to be a strength for him or his staff. So I wonder if, that this first game after that is just so much emotion from these guys, and Brent Key, an alum who played there and has coached there forever. And, you see him speaking in the post game so emotionally. I think the players really wanted to play for him and do well for him. I do wonder how long that lasts, though, if that could carry out for multiple weeks, or if that's just sort of a short-term thing and then they return back to what they're doing. And, I look at that game and I don't think, the sort of underlying statistics in that one. And I don't think Georgia Tech wins that game a whole lot based on how that played out. They happened to win this one and held on to win it. So good for them. I do have questions about whether it's going to continue further along the line.
Well, Dan Shirley, who works with us, is one of our editors and always chimes in on our mailbag whenever we've got Georgia Tech questions, was saying even before the upset win at Pitt that he thinks Brent Key would be a great choice to be the head coach at Georgia Tech and replace Jeff Collins. I don't know why he feels that way. He does. He thinks that Brent Key could be the guy. I don't know what Georgia Tech's going to do in the long run. I don't necessarily see Deion Sanders ending up back there, especially the way they sort of academics play such an important role in getting players, to Georgia Tech, the high standards, et cetera, be a challenge to just all of a sudden, kind of recruit wildly, right? Just bring anybody into the school and put football above academics at Georgia Tech. They've never really done that there. So I don't know that that's going to happen, but maybe Brent Key's the right fit for them in the long run. I'll say this, having watched Miami go through a coaching change with Manny Diaz, I mean, they played hard for him over those last 6 games when they went 5-1. And I do think that there is something to players wanting to play for a coach, right? Like, how inspired are they by that coach? How much are they willing to sacrifice and kind of go all out for him? As you said, maybe it was a 1-week deal. But I think in Miami's case last year, they did believe in Manny Diaz. They did like playing for him. I think it's interesting to see how much it's changed under Mario, where he's more of an old school, traditional guy, maybe not running the offense the players want to play in. I guess my point is, I just feel like college football has changed a little bit in the last few years, where the players really do have so much power over their performance, right? Like if they don't like the coach, they will not show up and play for him. They will not give the kind of effort that they want, and the guy ends up getting fired. And you see what happened with Jeff Collins. I think there was no doubt that he had probably lost that locker room, and a change needed to be made.
Well, I'll say this. I covered an interim coach last year at Virginia Tech too. And J.C. Price comes in right after, Fuente gets ousted there for the last 2 games of the regular season. They go down to Miami. Didn't play that great at Miami. Bad weather game, not particularly close in that one. But then they beat UVA. And, any interim coach that beats the rival, people are going to love that. They're going to go, oh, right, man, maybe J.C. Price needs to get some consideration for this. And then everybody opted out and went pro for the bowl game. They lost by 40. to Maryland. So, right. Those good vibes and good feelings only last so long with some of these interim coaches. Now you say that, then you look at Dabo Swinney was a interim coach who's turned into one of the best coaches in the country. So I'm not going to sit here and close the door on it. I'm just cautioning people to not get too caught up in the interim coach, any kind of short burst that you get out of them.
All right. This is from Chris V. With a 4-1 record, several key winnable games remaining on the schedule, what will it take for Duke to crack the AP top 25?
Well, man, it took Kansas a heavy lift to get there. And they beat Duke, and then they were 4-0 and had to get to 5-0 with a win over Iowa State to actually get there. I think with these programs that have sort of been down for a long time, they have to overcome a lot to win back some voters' trust. Like Texas or Miami wins one game at the beginning of the year, and everybody is ready to just skyrocket them up the rankings. Yeah. It's like, oh, you're top 10, you're top 12, something like that. But if you're not a historically great football program, you have to fight for that sort of recognition. And Duke's like that. Kansas is like that. It's taken Syracuse a while. Syracuse is ranked now, correct?
Yeah, I think they're 22nd.
They finally got up there. It took them to get 5-0 to get to that point. And normally, if you're an undefeated, Power 5 team, and even if you've played, a bunch of patsies in your non-conference schedule, people will reward you with that. So it might be tough for Duke. I mean, they've got Georgia Tech this week. I don't think if they beat Georgia Tech that's going to impress voters enough to do it. UNC, Miami after that, maybe get some wins over those, and then you could get in there. But I think for traditionally not great football schools like that, it's a tougher thing to do because, voters love to say so-and-so is back. This team after a long hiatus is back. Nebraska, get a big win, put them up there. People would love to do that. And there are a few programs, Texas, Miami specifically, USC, I think people were ready to give them the benefit of the doubt, even though they were horrible last year. And of course, they've been great this year. They've been winning these games and putting up huge numbers. So I don't want to detract from that, but it's a little bit easier of a path for them to get back up to the top 25 than somebody like Duke.
I would say if Duke beats Georgia Tech and North Carolina, I think 6-1 with a win over high scoring offense like North Carolina would get them in the poll at that point.
Yeah, I think so too. Because you look at the other wins so far. Temple, bad team. Northwestern's been terrible since beating Nebraska. North Carolina A&T, FCS team. Lost to Kansas. Kansas is a good team, but still lost there. Beat UVA, which might be a terrible team. And if you beat Georgia Tech, you're beating a team that 2 weeks ago fired its coach. And I know we talked about everything that Georgia Tech did great a couple of weeks ago, but still, you'll look at the ledger and go, that's not a team with a really good record. So I think it would take wins in the next two. If they beat UNC after beating Georgia Tech this week, then yes, I think certainly would warrant consideration and probably get in there.
All right. ESPN's Reese Davis says Drake May is QB1 in the Atlantic Coast Conference. Do you agree? If not, who? Hartman, DJU, Slovis, Leary are probably out of the running at this point. This is John R. Who do you think is the best quarterback in the ACC?
I mean, I'm somewhat biased because I just saw May play in person. And I think if you're going on totality of what they've done this season, I mean, Hartman missed games at the start of the season. He's back now. Or I think he missed one game. Was it one game?
One, yeah.
2 games. One game. So, one less game to pile up stats there. I think May and Hartman are the top two.
Yeah, I agree.
And I say that, and like, man, I don't know if I'm just like lingering, residual stuff from last year with Uyunglele, where I just don't quite trust it yet. I mean, he was exceptional in that Wake Forest game, and for some reason, I still can't get out of my mind just how bad he looked last year. So perhaps I'm being unfair to him in that regard, but I think it's May and Hartman 1 and 1A in some order. And May's been spectacular, but Hartman has had a track record of doing it over a couple years, and I don't think quite gets the credit that he should for running that offense that the Deacons have. And I put DJ in the top 3 there. Those 3 in some order, but like I said before, I just saw May play. I thought he was exceptional. His stats are the best in the league right now. I'll give him the edge right now, but obviously that's a fluid situation.
I agree with all that. The only other guy I'd throw in there and say he's gotten off to a great start is Garrett Schrader, the quarterback for Syracuse, who, to me, obviously without him playing that way, Syracuse isn't 5-0. I know they've obviously got one of the best running backs in the country in Tucker, but I just think he's really been the key. He and Robert and the new offensive coordinator, the magic that they've kind of done together, throwing the ball to Rondé Gadsden. And it's not like they've got a boatload of great receivers there. I mean, these are kind of just guys, and they've got some offensive balance there.
How about we start to give a little bit more credit to what Robert Anae has done?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was at Virginia last year, and Brennan Armstrong throws for 4,000 some yards, whatever it was. He leaves, and now Brennan Armstrong looks lost in that offense. He goes to Syracuse, and Garrett Schrader's doing very well. I'd also give a hat tip to Jordan Travis. I think he's been pretty good at Florida State. Maybe not an exceptional game against Wake Forest, but I think he's played pretty well this season.
Yeah, I agree. The quarterback conversation continues. This one's kind of an interesting one. DJ Uyunglele has a pretty successful year. Does he stay for his senior season? If so, where does that leave Cade Klubnik in this age of transfer portal with instant eligibility? It's kind of difficult to see Klubnik sitting on the bench 2 full years. This is from CES on our mailbag.
Oh man, talk about first world problems. Like, my goodness. Are we going to keep this guy that's going to be a first round draft pick, or do we turn to the guy that's going to be the next first round draft pick? I don't know. I don't know if what Uiagalelei has done this year will translate to the NFL. It seems like a pretty, heavy year NFL wise. Bryce Young, CJ Stroud being eligible, I believe, coming up this offseason. Those are some heavy hitters that are going to go at the top of the draft. Maybe that comes into his calculus for what he wants to do in the future. Like I said, I think he's looked good in a couple games here. You probably are going to want to see a larger sample size than that, but that would be a predicament with a guy that, how often did these top rated guys sit for 2 years?
Right.
It doesn't happen a whole lot. And maybe Dabo, the culture down there, and saying, hey, you're the guy next, and look at what these other guys have done once it's been their turn. Clemson, maybe that can override some of that, and maybe you work him in a little bit in some games and prepare him for that role. But nobody wants to sit, and nobody wants, especially when there are opportunities out there to play, and every school in the country would take you right away. Maybe you look at your options, you see what's out there, and if there's a situation that's better, you can do it. But I want to say that's a tough situation for Clemson, but every school in the conference would be killing to be in that situation.
I don't know that DJ's done enough yet. I mean, I know he's been great this year. I'm not going to knock anything he's done on the field this year, but you're right. I mean, you go back and look at last year and how bad he was. Do NFL teams feel the confidence, right, to say, yeah, you're definitely a guy that goes in the first 2 or 3 rounds, come out, right? I don't know that he's reached that point yet. Maybe if he leads Clemson to the playoff and continues to play at the level that he has, they it changes their mind. But I just think, is there a chance? Yeah, I think there's definitely a chance Cade Klubnik gets in the transfer portal and leaves. If there's, somebody else that really needs him, that can get him on the field right away. Most of those kids, like the Klubniks, who are the number 1 quarterback in their class, I think sitting out 1 year, they're willing to do, but sitting out 2, I don't know how often they're going to do that anymore. And I get it. It's Clemson. You could come in and easily take over for DJ in year 3 and keep the program at a high level. Maybe that's a better deal than transferring somewhere else. But I just think a lot of these kids that are elite quarterbacks, they're just not going to sit for 2 years. So I think there's definitely the possibility that Klubnik takes off if he's not on the field next year. So
yeah, possibly. I would hope that some of these guys look at the bigger picture though, and they go, man, this is a school that produced Deshaun Watson,
right,
and Trevor Lawrence, and look at the success they're having in the NFL. I know Watson has other issues that are not on the field type things, but his play has been pretty good from what he's done from a professional standpoint. So if I see that, and then I see, they're going to get Uiagalelei to the league too, probably at some point, that's a pretty good legacy there of quarterbacks, and maybe I want to be part of that instead of going somewhere else where it's less certain or there's less of a track record of putting guys at the next level.
All right. How many more wins does Mike Elko need to wrap up the Coach of the Year award? Amazing turnaround. I had zero hope for this year. Coach Cut won 4 in his first year after the Ted Roof experience, but somehow last year seemed worse than 2007. This is from Colin P.
Well, the Coach of the Year always goes to the coach who exceeds the media's expectations.
Right.
At the beginning of the year, we set expectations, and then if you exceed them by so much, then we go, what an impressive coaching job, even though we might have just been off with our preseason projections, which happens all the time. Dabo's won it a couple of times, I believe, probably not as many times as he should have based on the success. So, I mean, even if Clemson runs the table, I think there's sort of a Dabo fatigue and people voting for him. I think right now I look at the league and I go, you got to consider Dino Babers too, for a team that's 5-0. I mean, he was squarely on the hot seat. I think everybody expected him or Jeff Collins to be the first coach fired in the ACC, and all of a sudden he's 5-0. Now they have a really tough stretch coming up, and I think Duke was coming from a place further back in the standings last year. So if Elko gets that Duke team bowl eligible or stays in the mix here in the Coastal Division, I think he's got to be a serious contender. I think right now it's him and Babers neck and neck for Coach of the Year in the ACC.
I agree. I think it's probably going to take 8 wins, I would say, to get him over the top, and probably a Syracuse loss, which will probably happen, and maybe a Clemson loss for him not to get the Coach of the Year in the ACC. but he's done a phenomenal work.
If he goes 7-5, I could definitely see that. That's a 3-game improvement from before. And like I said, Duke was just so bad last year. It wasn't just like a winless ACC team. They were getting blown out by everybody. I mean, a Virginia Tech team that was getting ready to get rid of Justin Fuente went out there and beat him by 30 at home. That was the swan song for Justin Fuente. Virginia Tech was, beating down a Duke team that was just overmatched. So yeah, I'm very impressed with the job they've done, because it's not like you walk in and go, well, this is just such a talented roster that was underachieving. This was a roster that was not that talented based on recruiting rankings and everything there. He's turned them into a very tough out this season. And we'll see if that continues as the schedule gets harder, but just an impressive job.
All right. And I think this is the final one. Where does Louisville go from here? What do Satterfield's chances look like to finish the season? And is Jeff Brom available? This is from Brendan L.
Louisville fans really have a fascination with Jeff Brom, don't they? I mean, he's been okay at Purdue, and I realize he's a Louisville native and all that, and a legend that they want to bring back to the school, but they're talking about him like he's Nick Saban or something like that. It's like that's the only option out there, is the guy that's had one 9-win season at Purdue so far. I can understand the allure of bringing somebody a homecoming type thing, even though you look at Scott Frost at Nebraska and you go, man, it is not a guarantee this guy comes home and is the savior that elevates the program. If I'm Scott Satterfield, I certainly don't lose to UVA this week. That's for sure. If you're 0-3 in the conference and you lose to a UVA team that's looked terrible so far this season, to drop to 0-4, then you got Pitt, Wake Forest, Clemson, NC State left in the conference schedule. That is a tough road ahead. So a win this week might just be delaying the inevitable for a team that had to make some progress and turn a corner this year, and I don't think it's going to happen. But I don't know. I don't know the internal politics too well at Louisville. I know there's this fascination with Brom, but that's going to be a pricey person to go after. I think he's paid pretty well at Purdue, and Purdue has that Big Ten money that can probably match anything or come close to what Louisville is going to offer. I think it comes down to what Brom wants. Does he want to go back home? And he didn't a couple years ago. And I wonder if there's, any resentment from Louisville fans or Louisville brass over the fact that he didn't want to do that a couple years ago. But, it seems clear that stuff is just not working with Satterfield right now, which I'm surprised. I thought he was a really good coach. And I thought, that first year he came in and they really exceeded expectations. But since then, he's just not been able to elevate the program at all. And, this will be year 4, I think, with him. He's had a little bit of time to try to get it done, and it just hasn't happened. So if that's the case, maybe you do have to make a change.
Yeah, I don't know that Brom is necessarily the answer. I know obviously Louisville fans feel that he is. We just finished talking about a guy who I think's done a wonderful job now in 2 places in Robert and I don't know if he's necessarily head coach material, but in today's game, right, where it's so hard to find the right kind of coach who can push the right buttons, etc. You have a talent like Malik Cunningham there who, he's trying to put up numbers. He's putting up numbers pretty consistently, both on the ground and through the air. But how much better would he be if I was his quarterback's coach, right, and his offensive coordinator? Where might that Louisville offense be? And I know Satterfield's thing was offense, right? I mean, it always feels like they go with the offensive minded coordinator, offensive minded coach when you can't get necessarily a proven head coach. I don't know that Brom is a proven head coach, right? I mean, he's proven he does at Purdue pretty much what you expect him to do at Purdue. So
winning 9 games at Purdue is an accountlement. I mean,
that's what you should probably do every 5 years, right? At Purdue, like,
you get at least once, I would hope.
Right. Yeah. I just, and ultimately here, I think the bigger deal for Louisville is the fact that they are recruiting well. They've obviously spending some money on NIL to help facilitate that. How does changing the head coach affect that? Right. I mean, they've got some good players lined up to come in here. Will those guys all depart and all flee if Satterfield gets fired? So I think that's the bigger issue for them.
Well, that depends. Are they committed because they like Satterfield, or are they committed because they like the money that might be coming their way?
Or
Satterfield
both.
leaves, if Satterfield is changed, they change the head coach, but the money stays there. Maybe they're like, hey, this is still not a bad deal. I mentioned what their conference schedule is. This is their entire schedule. They play UVA this week versus Pitt versus number 15 Wake versus James Madison Don't sleep on the
Mm.
Dukes. They're pretty good this year. They're probably the best team in Virginia. That's not saying much. Virginia is in a sad state of power FBS football right now. But JMU is a sneaky good team that's transitioning up to the FBS. At number 5, Clemson versus number 14, NC State, and at number 13, Kentucky. That's 4 ranked teams on the back end of the schedule, plus Pitt and JMU. That is going to be tough. And I don't see a path to, Satterfield doing enough that would make Louisville fans really be happy about the progress with the program. So maybe prepare for that change sooner rather than later.
Let's pick the games in the ACC this week real quick, and then I know you got to go. Louisville, Virginia.
I feel like I've picked Louisville before and I've been burned by it. I still just like Malik Cunningham as the playmaker, and Virginia's been pretty bad itself. I'm going to go with Louisville on this one.
I'm with you. I think the Cardinals win this week. Virginia Tech at Pitt. Let's put you on the spot.
Pitt. Oh my goodness. It's not even close. It's like a 14-point line, and I don't think it's going to be that close. Every time Virginia Tech goes up to Pitt, with the exception of one year where they had 3 receivers with 100 yards and they won 39-36 in this really wild game, Pitt has just curb stomped them every time they go up there. The 2018 game, Pitt averaged like 13 yards a play. It was one of the worst defensive performances I've ever seen in my life. And 2020 wasn't a whole lot better. So, I would expect Pitt to roll on that one.
Yeah, I got Pitt rebounding from their loss. Their coach isn't going to allow for that to happen 2 weeks in a row. Duke at Georgia Tech.
I'm going to go with Duke in that one. I just like the way that they're playing. I do have some questions on whether Georgia Tech can keep that sort of intensity and emotional level 2 weeks in a row. I'll take Duke on the road in that. I'm
going to take Georgia Tech. I'm going to 2 weeks in a row. Brent Key. Somehow, some way, I have a feeling we're going to have to put Georgia Tech somewhere in the top 6, 7 of our rankings pretty soon because of this role that they're on here with Brent Key. All right, North Carolina, Miami. I've got North Carolina taking care of business.
I'm always wary of the team that looked a little bit too good against what I consider bad competition.
Okay.
It just, man, Miami, I look at that Middle Tennessee result and I'm like, well, if you can't stop Middle Tennessee from throwing deep on you, are you going to stop UNC from doing it? I'll take UNC. I don't know what the line is on that game, but
Miami was favored by 4.5, by the way.
Miami favored by 4.5.
I don't know what they know in Vegas. I have no idea what they know that I don't.
That might be one of those, like, what do they know that we don't? And maybe I'm a sucker, but I'll go for UNC just because I saw them play so well last week, and that's probably how they get me is, the last thing I see is the direction I go. But I'll go with the Tar Heels.
I think they've won 3 in a row against Miami. They've got the same coaching staff pretty much intact. I know they changed their defensive coordinator, but that's the same group that's lit up Miami's defense for years. And the Canes, just too many big plays on defense. They keep giving up. Clemson at Boston College. I think we're both going with Clemson pretty easily.
Yeah,
right?
I don't think there's much to analyze there. I don't like Boston College's chances.
All right. Army at Wake Forest. I'm super impressed with Wake Forest. Looking at that roster, the talent, I mean, that's Duke level talent, really. In all honesty, you just have a quarterback in Sam Hartman who knows his system so well. Look, Wake Forest, they're to me the story of this ACC. Just the job that Dave Clawson has done there in his time, just building this perfect system. I'm surprised more people don't do the slow mesh. I would there's so many offenses struggling, right? Quarterbacks, they can't block anybody. Why not use something similar to what they do at Wake Forest?
Well, I think the issue is when you play a really good defensive line like Clemson, they can wreck shop and just throw everything off. And you have to have a quarterback that can play with like chaos around him. I think Hartman is unique in that sense that, he holds that slow mesh and it feels like he's just surrounded by defensive linemen and offensive linemen, and he's okay just standing in there and throwing it. I will make a point. Wake Forest Army played perhaps the most entertaining game ever last year. 70-56. Wake Forest won that game. Wake Forest scored 70 points and they possessed the ball for 17 minutes in that game. So talk about great offensive play. I think the Deacons probably roll on this one, but this could be an interesting, sort of clash of styles here.
And the last one, which is probably the toughest one to pick this week, Florida State at NC State.
Two teams coming off a loss. You always kind of wonder with NC State, if there's a hangover after losing the biggest game that you had of the season. Don't know if I quite trust the Noles going on the road in a game like this. I'll take NC State to win that one.
I'm with you. I really like what Jordan Travis has done. I think Mike Norvell's got it going in the right direction. I just think this is a tough 3-week span. Wake Forest, NC State, Clemson. I could see them losing those 3 games and winning the rest of them. So, all right, that wraps it up. Thank you, Andy, for joining me. I know you've got a phone call to jump on in 3 minutes, so make sure you check out Andy's work and my work over at The Athletic. We will be back with more podcasts after this week.